Hi everyone. I think we are going to start at this time. As always, my virus database decided to update right now, so forgive about that. So thank you everyone for coming. I'm very impressed about the amount of people coming in. Please keep in mind this is my second very serious presentation and the first big presentation, so I'm a little bit nervous, but just bear with me. So we will be talking today about large-scale imports in Drupal 8 and mostly architecture and how you can approach them. So it's applicable to the example of custom imports when you write your import code from scratch utilizing Drupal APIs, and also you can also apply the similar principles when you're structuring your migrations with Migrate module. So we will touch base on architecture, but before we dive in, let me introduce myself. My name is Anna Mykhailova. I'm a web developer at Digital Echidna. I'm Ukrainian, and I have been speaking English as my language of choice of communication only 6% of my life. So I'm sorry if you hear any mistakes or problems. All right. So before we start, let's touch on when we use custom imports or when we use Migrate framework or anything like that. So in my day-to-day job, I encountered a problem when Migrate doing a lot of great things. For you, it's very robust framework, but clients want something in between of feeds and Migrate, because at some point of site developers development, it becomes too robust, and clients become very scared to run a recurrent migration. So they want precise control over what's updated, and they also want something very lightweight. The site kind of doesn't notice, and it doesn't affect your performance. It can also be run outside of cron job, on the ground, so clients just set up it once and they never remember to run it. It's just maintained automatically for you, and it happens very often. So some of my imports were running every 30 seconds, processing large amount of items. So when you do this task, you probably want a complete custom control over import. It also was a challenge to do with combined external sources. So for example, you want to combine XML source feed and you want to combine CSV and JSON. It depends on what external site actually produces the data. Like big colleges or higher education institutions, they use sometimes very legacy frameworks to store their data about programs, about courses, about all these updates. They still want to use them in Drupal. And sometimes it's not even possible to import completely into Drupal. You just reference that and you render it based on the requests, and you just import some part of properties of these entities. So whenever it doesn't fit into normal node concept or content type concept, you can be considering a custom import. It's also very important if you're using any search framework like Solr, let's say, and Search API, to be saving this entity just once, especially if you're using save indexing on save, when the client wants immediate index results. So as more you're saving, as more basically indexing happening, as more performance effective it becomes, as more you affect your sites during the peak hours. And then also provides you a lot of customization in terms of what you're doing with the nodes that are not any more applicable in the source. Some clients don't want to delete everything, they just want to unpublish it or move it to archive status or do any other custom functionalities that might still retain the data for them. And another one is it's very scalable, and I was testing it with 500,000 records at one point import. So for me, performance and the time of the import was really crucial. So I will explore today the architecture that I came up with to solve all of these issues. So you're starting the journey. You identified that you need a big recurrent import, and where do you start? Well, first of all, gather your requirements. So sometimes it's a huge import, but it's just one-time import. But always ask your client beforehand, is it going to be periodic? Is there any chance that it's going to be periodic anytime in the future? Because maybe in the discovery process of your project, they say, no, it will be just one-time migration. So you write it with this thought in mind, but then a few months into the development, they say, we really like this integration. Can you please make it periodic? And that changes everything. So gather your requirements very carefully. Spend a couple sessions with the client to actually identify what they want. Another second requirement is it going to be manual or automated? And by manual, I mean you pass the control to the client editor or administrator who will be going to some sort of interface, either contribution module interface or your written interface, and pressing the button to run the import. Or it's going to be completely automated. It means the developer will set it up and then run either on cron job or continuous integration. And we will cover this a little bit later. So the second thing to think about is the architecture. And when I'm talking about architecture on the import, there are two parts to that. First is your Drupal content type architecture. Think about relations, think about taxonomies, think about complicated fields like images or files, or is it going to be multilingual? Think about all of that before you start planning your import, because that really this is really important to map the data. So before you start even mapping something, define this and test it on like dummy data or devel-generated content, so the client actually see how it will accommodate the feeds they provide. And think about your class hierarchy, and I'm talking about object-oriented class hierarchy. So do you need base classes? Do you need an abstract class you're going to extend? Or do you want to use some Drupal-provided interfaces or traits? Think about that. Think about how many children classes you might want. Do you want one child class per content type, or do you want one big import and import related content type together? It all changes project by project. My rule of thumb is if your operation for saving takes more than half a second, then probably it's a good time to split them into two operations. So you're not running into timeouts on browser or on your command line. And think about sources. So talk to your client about the sources. Talk about, is it going to be just a simple CSV or JSON file, or is it going to be something very complicated? And it can go wild. It can be something very extreme old school XML API, and your simple XML provided by PHP just doesn't really keep up with. So talk about sources with your client and think about libraries or any external tools that might help you to parse the source. So what are your options? The easiest solution would be to create a manually triggered import, and basically you click the button and Byte API will take it from there. The downside for that will be, well, somebody has to manually click it, that first, so it's always a human factor. And the second one will be if you have a really huge import, like hundreds of thousands of items, somebody will be staring at the browser screen and you will be telling, sorry, you can't close this tab. So that is unfortunate. It can be a cron job, but consider that many hosting have cron limitations, so cron can't run forever, as well as cron is handling a lot of other things on your side. So it can be external process if you use different contrib modules to basically separate your cron jobs, but consider how big your import is and what will happen when the cron job finishes working. And the most complicated but also most flexible solution is continuous integration. My weapon of choice is Jenkins, because Butler can do you all, and we have a session later on Jenkins if you want to. I just dip my toes into Jenkins C, and I only do very simple things with it, but I know that it can do way more. So we will touch up a little bit on that. Sources. So when it comes to file sources, as I said, that they are as diverse as the information world can go. So they can be placed in various scenarios, and the easiest one is basically manually dumped into FTP, but it rarely is the case. Sometimes clients IT drops them automatically on a certain schedule to your files folder, and they can be as simple as JSON, CSV, and XML files. It comes to more complicated solution when it's some sort of external feed, and even more complicated when you're supposed to query external database, and if it's not MySQL format, or external file server, and you have to use a certain library to actually have an SFTP or FTP connection. So think about the sources, think about how you go into target them to actually first achieve the data. Everything starts with architecture. As we touch on the content type architecture, think about your fields, think about your taxonomies, and think about how big the import will need and what are your requirements to retain the nodes. So by that I mean I had a client who wanted to retain 10 years of data. If you think about having 10 years of data as every day represented as a node, that's a lot of records. By putting them in Drupal node system, that will be overloading the site, and every query on every other content type will just basically slow down tremendously. So in this case, you would like to think about custom entities. They're very easy and very powerful in Drupal 8, and they will provide you a separate table, and you have a complete control over definitions of the fields on the table. You can merge everything together, so all the fields are just columns on this table. So you gain faster SQL queries, you gain faster performance, and you can actually have a retirement algorithm just affecting this table without affecting the entire site and your other content type structures. And think about the structure of your feed. So if you have a very complicated XML feed with nested attributes and everything like that, then probably simple XML is not your solution. My weapon of choice is Query Path library, which can be installed through the composer, and basically it acts as jQuery but on XML, and it can also act like that on JSON and HTML. So the point for query path is that you basically query XML selectors as you would do in a jQuery writing your CSS. It makes everything very easy. It can also modify the markup for you and allow you to save on the fly. Another caveat that I got is that get your access credentials to any feed early. It's great if it's a publicly accessible feed and you can just curl into it. However, if that's something with secure access, get and test your credentials really early. And sometimes what Drupal can do when you are logged in and through the browser is completely different when you're trying to access it on background, like server variables changes, request variables changes, so be mindful of that. So finding the right key, as I said, determine how you access your data and what is needed. And funny enough, a lot of clients want to host themselves nowadays. So basically, check even if the curl install, if you're planning to do a curl request, because that might not be the case. Check if you can install external libraries on your server. Is Java is there? Check for special permissions or credentials, because not all of the client IDs will give you a sudo access. So sometimes you may have very limited permissions and you're just not able to access the directory. So all of these pitfalls needs to be sorted out before you start planning even the code for your import project. So the foundation of the import is follows as simple as 3 operations: get the data, parse the data, and save the data. Very simple. There is no rocket science in here. However, there are a couple problems that you have to think about beforehand. It's time of the import, and this is a very important one. If you have a large-scale import, the import might last for days. How will this affect the server? Well, probably a server will be very slow. And if it's on the live side and not accessible to end user or gives the slow responses, that everybody have a bad experience, and as so, everybody just hate your site. So not a good idea. And another one is your server resources. So if you're running on cron, how many other jobs are already running on cron at this particular time? What amount of percent of like your cron job is actually taken from the entire cron process? So think about your server resources. What is the best time of your import when you're supposed to run it? So talk to your client, ask about their peak hours, ask about the periods of most interest. Let's say for higher education clients, we would have something like registration weeks, when the people just go on the site and register for programs and courses. So probably that's not a good idea in the middle of the day on registration week to run a high scale recurring import. So define all of that and think about how your architecture can accommodate the time of the import and set correct expectation to the client. So I came up with the approach of 2 queues. Which starts with get sources, schedule it for import, and populate get a queue. So get a queue is basically a queue of items that holds the blob of data or chunks of blob of data. So what I do in there, I'm getting the data and just set it without even parsing in a queue item in the Drupal. What it gives me is that I don't have to run the import immediately. If the server dies, if it's not a good time to run the import, Drupal will just hold for it and process the queue when you tell him to process it. So basically, that gives you a flexibility to process only one import file or chunk of it without actually overloading your site resources. As well, if it fails, it will pick up from the item when it failed, and basically you don't have to write anything custom in order to control where it stopped and how to pick up from that point. Then when you process get a queue, all you do is just parse in this big blob of information and populate a set a queue. So every row or record on the feed that is coming from your get a blob is a one row or one queue item for a set a queue. What it gives you, you don't save it into Drupal. You just tell Drupal, I will have these 200 records coming to you soon, but hold on. Don't process it right now. I might not have resources right now, but you just be aware of it. So it's saving it for you. And then when you have time, and it's the best time for you to do, you just process in a set a queue, you parse in the fields, and because it's just one row, it will be likely just one node you're saving. It will be very fast, and nobody will ever notice. So you just save this into your content types, and everybody is happy. So let's say you start running in 2 a.m. in the morning. You just schedule it everything, the blob is parsed, and then it's saving very fast during the less active hours for your site. So what's the trigger for that? How do I get the data? If you're taking the manual approach, it can be a custom form, a configuration form, and then batch API, all it does, it runs very fast, all it does, it just populates the cat queue for you. So it basically schedules the files and put all of these blobs unprocessed really fast into the queue. And if it's a background job, then it's either a cron job if you have small import, or a dash command that can be attached to Jenkins later on. So right now I merged basically 2 approaches together to fit in one slide. So I have a custom form which extends configuration-based form. You can specify some configuration settings, either I run overnight or URL changes. Sometimes some clients have dynamic URLs and they want to have control over what file to put and when. You can also reuse your import classes and populate multiple content types. So all of these configuration settings can go there and be saved. And then all you do is basically pass the flag manual, and you submit the form, and batch populates your manual queue. If you take in a Drush command, it's very easy to define. You just define a new Drush command, and that's it. Later on, you just call this Drush alias with arguments on a certain environment in Jenkins. And that's it. Like, it's one line of code. You call Drush command with Jenkins, and Jenkins take care of you. Through Jenkins UI, you can set up a schedule. You can verify how the build went, and you can rerun the build automatically if it's failed. So I use approach of one abstract base class, and then basically I extend from it. So in the base class, the logic would be to parse data blobs that I got, either from the form or from the Drush command, and populate the setter queue. Then all you need to do is define two child classes, which basically identify queue worker plugins. That one is running on cron, and the only difference is that you define the time for the cron. And another one is running manually. And those two child classes, those are actually, that's it. There is no code in them because they take everything from the base. However, if you need some differences between the jobs that are running on cron and manually, you are welcome to extend and add additional functionality. So after you process the getter queue, you successfully should have populated the setter queue. And all you need to do in there is basically save. So you're saving your items based on your content types or custom entities. And again, all the logic goes into the base class, and then you just extend it for the cron and for the manual. My suggestion would be to set cron time as low as you really need, because if you overflow custom hosting restrictions, then you might lose all your queue items, even if you're using like the queues that's supposed to retain the items. I ran into this problem a lot. So test a couple times, see what's appropriate. Maybe you should make more smaller chunks of your data in order to pass to the setter queue. And that's it. This is as simple as it can get, and it's kind of, I think, provides a kind of medium in between of feeds and what migrate can do. And then with Jenkins, you can basically switch it on and off with one command line command, and that's it. Questions? Yeah.
You mentioned that you would put things in the queue and then trigger it, and then they would pre-process things and save them. Have you thought of doing the pre-processing in advance outside of Drupal so that doesn't...
Yeah, it depends on the source that is coming. Sometimes it's like very close up IT department, and you can't really do anything about it.
I mean, so one option that I've used once, I don't know if it's a good idea to use in the future, is to actually build another thing in the middle that gets the data.
You could.
Bunches of, do you think that would be useful? Or?
It depends. I think it depends on how long the preprocessing, because there are 3 stages, right? So during the getter to setter stage, you actually process it out. So it basically divides the time in half. So you're not running into the issue of overfloating the time spent for saving one node, because you already processed it, and then you just feed Drupal with one node, which is very, very fast. So it's kind of in the middle, but it's basically really chunk up. So you can, and didn't run into the problem of like overfloating the time spent that was allowed to save it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you would manage something like this using Jenkins as opposed to cron?
Yeah. So basically, you have I did only very simple integration, mind you. But all you do is you set up your Jenkins job and you call your production site or development site, whatever environment you use. So you basically do your alias, call your Drush, provided you have a Drush install, and call your custom Drush command with the arguments, and that's it. Then you set a Jenkins schedule, and then Jenkins is doing everything for you.
Okay.
Yeah, so like it's like I'm using Jenkins as cron on steroids because I completely can't control what Jenkins is doing, right? As opposed to cron that is sometimes like, oh, it didn't run because the environment wasn't active enough or like something like that. I know for sure that Jenkins will run no matter what and tell me if the build failed or not, but I'm not doing any fancy stuff with it. All I do is just run the drush command.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, any other questions? Yeah.
Did you start off using Drupal migration services initially and then decide that that wasn't going to work for you?
Yeah.
What were the decisions?
The decision was because migration does a lot of great stuff for you. Like you can create menu items, you can do translations, you can do everything. Like you can, it's a very powerful framework. But client wanted just a pin control, just update one field, but very often. Or just do like, real big updates, and then when I migrate through the command line, somebody will have to actually, on cron, I wouldn't fit into the span of the hosting restrictions, like 3 minutes wasn't enough. And then I had to write a script that actually would run migration in chunks with limit, and like a developer would have to sit in there because the span would change. Whereas, like, I figured out that it would be very easy to just have some configuration options passed to my custom import and then feed it to Jenkins and forget about it. That was my thinking. I mean, everything in Drupal as in the web can be done multiple ways. So I'm not pretending, trying to impose that this is the way to go. It worked at the time, so great. Yeah.
If there's one thing you could suggest to improve the migration framework to better support what you're doing here, what would it be?
I don't know if Migrate would provide like some friendly for the user, not for the developer UI. That would be one I would like.
Someday.
It just like clients get very intimidated when you say I'm going to use Migrate, and then what's Migrate, and you post it in all the documentation. They're like, oh, well, that's not what we want. We just want this to be imported into Drupal, and it's really hard to explain them that this is how it's going to work.
I hear you.
Yeah. All right. That's it. Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. You.
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit more on where the getting, setting, and save happens? Like
Yeah, sure. I'll show you. Oh, wait, got out of my presentation. So the getting gets in here. So basically, you either get it on submit of the form. See how I have import data queue populate. So basically, in this helper function, I would get either the curl request. It really depends what you're getting, like as a curl to the feed, or getting the files from files directory, or basically send a SQL query to external database. And all it does then, it just populates the get a queue. So basically, it just gets a big blob of information and just saves it into the queue. Then after that, immediately you basically process the get a queue. So you get this big blob of information, and all you do is you drop it into the chunks. So basically, let's say you have XML feed records, right? So every record will be this chunk of information that you process. And you do all of the pre-processing and formatting and anything you need. And then just again, save it into the queue. And this will be a setter queue. And then when setter queue comes in, it has all of the nicely formatted information with all of the needed mapping and everything. And all you do is just save it. And that's it. So basically in here, I save it. But it's already parsed and pre-processed. But how you do like this in the middle part, it basically really depends on what you get.
And all of this is in custom entities, right?
You don't have to use custom entities. You, if you want, you can use nodes, you can use taxonomies, users, like whatever is your weapon of choice. I use this with custom entities too. It just depends on what you need, really.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. What?
We're using just a regular Drupal cron, or using like Elise cron?
I tried both. I tried Elise cron, I tried Ultimate cron, but they still didn't, like, because I had the import of really like 500,000 nodes. no cron helped, unfortunately. So I had to come out, but it also depends on your hosting as well. Like some hosting, like really strict, like you can't really override the time. It's 3 minutes and that's it. You can't do anything more. And then I couldn't really, like, you could process it in small chunks on cron, but if the client wanted the, the import fast, then you have to really control what it spans on. So for example, if you have 100,000 items and you chunk them into like 10,000 items, right, every chunk, and it runs, but your cron runs, let's say every 10 minutes that hosting allowed you, it's still a big amount of time, and you're wasting some time on like, rescheduling the cron job and then simply relaunching it, whereas in Jenkins it will be continuous, so it's saving this bit of time. And for like higher education client, it was very sensitive to get the entire program updated information before the registration days. But then they have legal requirements not to post them earlier, so you couldn't really, I had to fit it into and find out something that will do for me very fast and continuous without actually, breaking Drupal and switching out to maintains mode and just importing in multiple.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much for coming.